Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how to build a successful cybersecurity program. My name is Mark Chaplin and I'm the principal here at the Information Security Forum. Just before we start, I'd like to thank PECB for the opportunity to present on this important topic. For those of you that have already joined, if you have any questions throughout the session, please use the chat feature or the question feature in your GoToMeeting panel, and Ardian and myself will address those questions at the end of the session. I have a wealth of information to share with you today with regard to a cybersecurity program, and more importantly, why it's important in the context of business. What are the kind of things and the reasons why you would establish a security program for cyber, and also look at what are the important ingredients or what are the building blocks for a cybersecurity program. And towards the end, I'll wrap up with some key takeaways to get you started on the journey. Before we start, for those of you that may not be familiar with the Information Security Forum, we are an international association of almost 500 blue chip leading global organizations around the world. They typically include organizations from all industry sectors and government. And for those organizations, we provide a range of services, including an extensive research program where we deliver 1 to 2 reports per month. We also maintain a range of information risk management tools, such as benchmarking, maturity models, risk assessment models, and also supply chain tools. And finally, and most importantly, our main focus is on collaboration and networking and bringing together security professionals from around the world to help them manage information risk, cyber risk more effectively. Just to give you an idea of the types of individuals that are within the membership worldwide, they range from C-level executives all the way down to IT professionals. So it can include analysts, consultants, managers, officers, software developers, and auditors. And as I said, we provide a range of services and products and tools to help those individuals deliver security services within their organization. And what I'll be doing over the next 40 minutes or so is giving you an introduction to and an explanation of what a cybersecurity program actually looks like and how individuals within our membership typically build one. First of all, I think it's really important to have context whenever we're talking about cybersecurity or cyber risk management. As we know, there's an increasing dependency on technology within all industry sectors around the world. And obviously, businesses are pursuing a strategy typically to generate revenue, be competitive, provide a range of products and services to their customers. There is always a financial element to that, and commerce plays an important part. And increasingly, in a globalized environment, organizations operate more actively within a supply chain. So both upstream and downstream organizations are finding that they're not only sharing workforces, but they're also sharing information, they're sharing technology, they're often sharing premises as well. So supply chain is an important aspect of how you protect your organization from cyber threats. And I'll also be touching on some other important aspects that influence how you manage cyber risk, including your workforce, the physical locations in which you operate. And also one other aspect that is always important is the physical and the environmental factors. So whether it's the power, telecommunications, utilities, and that kind of thing. As I've said, our members operate in all industry sectors. Many of you will probably be in the financial sector, or you might be in retail, but you can also be in pharmaceutical, industrial, manufacturing. So there is a wide range. And even though there are some discrete differences between each of these industry sectors, there's a lot of commonality with regards to the approach that you should be taking when identifying cyber risk and managing it on an ongoing basis. Increasingly, we are finding CISOs and other security professionals with a range of demands that come down from business leaders and business executives in an organization. Increasingly, they're being asked to provide assurance that they can manage a cyber crisis when it occurs. Often, board-level directors are reading in the media every day about competitors or organizations in the supply chain that are experiencing some form of breach. And so therefore, naturally, they start to ask questions of the CISO, the Chief Risk Officer, and other key individuals in the organization. We're also increasingly seeing, when we talk to business leaders in our membership, that the board of directors, business executives want assurance that all of us are protecting or have a clear understanding of the assets that are subject to protection within the organization. They want to be assured that the basic protective measures are in place, what you might refer to as baseline measures. They also want to know that should a crisis occur, that the organization is resilient enough globally to be able to withstand that crisis and actually still continue to provide products and services to clients and customers. We're also seeing increasing demand to prove that the approach taken for managing information risk and cyber risk is proven, is actually demonstrating that it's working. And we also find that boards of directors are asking for evidence that there is good cybersecurity governance in place. And whether it's any of these first 6 items or anything else, I think the most important thing that boards are now asking of their CISO and other security professionals in their organization is proof that the approach that's being taken actually works. And that's covered by the discipline of assurance. And so we'll touch on that a little bit over the next half an hour. Traditionally or historically, a lot of the reasons why we've invested so much time, effort, and money in cybersecurity is because of compliance reasons. So many of you probably operate in an organization that is subject to industry-related compliance requirements. So it could be health and safety, it could be financial requirements, depending on the sector that you're in. But also increasingly, organizations worldwide are subject to a number of directives, legislation, such as GDPR, which has a global reach. We also see other directives in Europe coming out, for example, with regards to NIST, the Network Security Directive, which has often been overshadowed by GDPR over the last couple of years. Also the health sector, energy, utilities, all industry sectors have a range of compliance requirements, and many of them do have an influence over how organizations implement and manage cybersecurity on an ongoing basis. So that's just one of the drivers that we see across our membership. But ultimately, many, if not all of you, have a role within your organization which focuses specifically on managing and protecting information and the technology that is used to support business services and operations throughout your organization. And it's no surprise when we look at some of the statistics to see there's been a huge increase in the adoption, dependence, and use of information and technology over the years. Only recently, I looked at a few statistics which highlight that for every second in the day on the internet, there are more than 4,000 Skype calls being started. In 1 second, there is more than 80 gigabytes of internet traffic being transmitted around the world. Almost 80,000 Google searches being performed every second. More than 80,000 YouTube videos being viewed, and more than almost 3 million emails being sent every single second. Now, we know that most of those are probably spam or unwanted email, but it just gives you an idea or some insight into the adoption and the speed with which this technology is being used. Now, regardless of your role within your organization, whether it's in IT or whether it's in cybersecurity, you'll be very familiar with the fact that you often have a lot of legacy technology that you have to maintain over time, a lot of information technology that you're deploying and maintaining today, And at the same time, you always need to keep an eye on what's emerging, what's around the corner, what kind of technologies may you have imposed on you or you'll need to adopt in the future. We've seen over the last 2 or 3 years a particular increase in the focus and attention on operational technology. That's the technology that's used typically in industrial environments, and there are a range of concerns. So even if you're working in an industry sector that's not considered industrial, there's probably a great deal of technology that you're using that has inherent weaknesses in it and will influence your cyber risk profile throughout your organization. Cloud, with principles such as cloud first, continues to be adopted across all industry sectors, and we see increasingly organizations now putting more sensitive and critical information into their cloud environment. And that's obviously leveraging some of the technologies that we saw probably a decade ago with regards to virtualization. There's a great deal of interest in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and various technologies that are supporting the need to automate more and more business processes today. While quantum computing is still some time away, lots more organizations are now looking at the implications of that. And then we've got other emerging technologies which are now being adopted aggressively around the world, such as blockchain and Internet of Things. So from a technology perspective, many organizations have a great deal of complexity to deal with regard to technology. They have an increasing amount of information that they need to protect, and the whole time they're concerned about a number of challenges that they face when they need to protect it. Just to give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the technologies that are emerging and actually being adopted now, artificial intelligence is being adopted by some of the tech giants to automate technology. We'll see with Alexa, for example, that Amazon are now going into different sectors such as healthcare and looking to deploy that technology on a large scale. We also see China, for example, which is likely over the next couple of years to be the biggest consumer and producer of Internet of Things technology. And we also see a number of the tech giants increasingly being targeted by cyber criminals and other adversaries to either steal data, to gain some form of advantage in gaining access, or increasingly just trying to identify and target individuals for the purposes of monetary gain or identity theft. This visualization here, which may be popular amongst many of you, is on a website called Information is Beautiful. It's a really good way of presenting the extent to which data breaches are occurring now on a daily basis. If you look on the left-hand side at the breaches that were occurring about a decade ago, you will still see that they were reasonably small scale, but the numbers were increasing year on year. If you then fast forward a decade to this year, you'll notice that the bubbles, which indicate the extent to which a breach has occurred, this is referring to the amount of records that have been breached or disclosed to an unauthorized party, has significantly increased. And in fact, the bubbles are not only increasing in size due to the size of breaches that we now typically see in the media on a day-to-day basis, but we also see that the number of bubbles has increased as well. So you find that this particular visualization is trying to cram a lot of information, identifying the extent to which these breaches have occurred. And I think if you were to zoom in on one of these areas of this visualization, you would recognize a lot of household names. And I think the significance of this is the fact that no industry sector is immune from a targeted or untargeted attack from some form of adversary, whether it's a criminal group, a rogue nation state, or similar. So I recommend you have a look at that website. It's very useful, but it just gives you an idea of one view of what cyber security or cyber threats look like. When we look at cyber threats, there are a number of different sources or different origins of what might lead to a cyber-related incident. In this slide, I'm showing you a pie chart that breaks threats down into 3 different types: adversarial, accidental, and environmental. The focus for this presentation is on adversarial, and the reason for that is in most cases, and many of you may have a slightly different definition, but in most cases, a cyber threat is typically one that's adversarial in nature. So it's often an individual or a group that is specifically targeting an organization or a location or an individual or a particular asset in order to perform some harmful or malicious intent. So to give you an idea of what we mean by this, in the energy sector, for example, we're seeing an increase in the number of directed and indirect attacks on organizations in oil and gas, for example. With the emergence of blockchain and cryptocurrency, we're now seeing an increase in that type of technology being targeted, and also not just an increase in the frequency of targeting, but also an increase in the volume or the amount of money that's at stake. The reason why privacy continues to be of major concern to organizations is the fact that social media and some of the big social media giants continue to collect a significant amount of money, a significant amount of information about individuals. And as a result of that, we see them being targeted. So Cambridge Analytica is just a particularly important example of where weaknesses in the Facebook platform were exploited in order to manipulate, in this particular case, elections. As I've said, no industry sector is immune. You could be a rail operator in Germany, for example. You could be the German government. Ransomware attacks, which is probably one of the greatest threats to organizations today, is of particular concern amongst security professionals around the world. And that also extends to a range of different types of malware, such as cryptojacking, which is taking control of endpoints and using them to mine cryptocurrency, and also different types of viruses, worms, and other types of malware which continue to increase at an exponential rate. I provided a range of sources there if you want to go and find further information about some of these examples. The visualization that I showed you from Information is Beautiful is predominantly data breaches that are associated with identity theft and targeting of financial records or financial information. And there are two sources which are very popular: the Identity Theft Resource Center and also another organization which is the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. This just gives you an extent to which records are being disclosed to unauthorized parties or compromised. And this is a figure that's just worth keeping available to you when you start to engage with business to understand, well, what is the extent to which records are being breached? And increasingly, organizations are interested in what are the financial costs or the losses associated with each of these breaches. Now, most of the attacks or the breaches that we hear published in the media are typically privacy related, or they are financially motivated. There are just some examples here of organizations that have been targeted. So while financial motivation or identity theft is the particular goal of cyber criminals, you'll notice even from these examples that you can be in any industry sector. It could be retail, you could be in finance, you could be in medical, you could be in health. So no industry sector, no organization is immune from these attacks. And I'm sure that all of you have responsibility within your organization to provide that assurance back to the business. So it's always worth being aware of the types of attacks, the types of breaches, so you've got a very strong understanding for when you are asked those important questions by your CEO, CFO, or other members of the board. Now, some of the things that you won't always hear about in the media are some of the losses that I would describe as tangible. Privacy and financial related attacks really are attacking information that's not necessarily specific to your organization. So In the bottom left-hand corner here, we've got an example of a car manufacturer somewhere else in the world that has produced a car that is very similar to a Land Rover model. And it's actually through the theft of intellectual property and trade secrets and other similar information that's been stolen and exploited in order to provide a competitive edge. This has nothing to do with identity theft. It has nothing to do with trying to achieve financial gain through stealing money. This is purely information assets, what we might describe as crown jewels being targeted specifically by an organization in order to misappropriate, in this case, trade secrets. You also need to be aware of cyber-related events or attacks that have collateral damage. NotPetya is a very good example of organizations in a number of different sectors, including legal, shipping, logistics, where those organizations weren't targeted, but they were hit by a piece of malware that had huge ramifications in their organizations, where their whole infrastructure was taken out within a matter of 5 to 10 minutes. So again, while your organization may not be specifically targeted, you certainly need to be aware of the implications and the consequences should your organization be hit by a piece of malware that, in this particular case, NotPetya, that is more disruptive than just stealing or leading to the loss or compromise of information. I think in the case of Equifax, many of you will be familiar with the circumstances around Equifax, and I think the significance of this one is the fact that it was a very trivial activity that allowed the attackers to gain access to the back-end systems and databases in order to extract data. And I think the financial losses that organization is having to deal with at the moment is well in excess of $700 million. And that could certainly reach $1 billion in the long term. So we're talking about a lot at stake. It's not just about the information. It's not just about finances and identity. These cyber attacks, cyber breaches are increasingly having a great deal of impact on organizations. And the final image on this slide in the bottom right-hand corner is an example of, in the UK, we have the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the supervisory body in the UK for enacting GDPR. And they report on a daily basis of the enforcement action that they're taking out on organizations. And recently there was an airline that is currently facing a significant fine of almost £200 million as a result of a breach. So we're talking about major impact for businesses, not just disruption, but we're talking about a financial exposure. So without instilling any fear, uncertainty, and doubt in any of you joining this webinar, there is certainly a lot to think about when it comes to protecting your organization, its information, its technology, and also its employees, customers, and other stakeholders in the supply chain. So what are the challenges? What are the concerns that organizations have with regards to actually dealing with and handling those different types of security threat that organizations face today? Well, I'm showing a slide here that has Victor Frankenstein. Now, I use this slide because a lot of organizations today are still challenged with developing and implementing a very strong, effective cyber security program, or a more broader approach to managing cyber risk. And there are a number of challenges that I've certainly seen 15 years here at the ISS, and we've seen over the 30 years that the ISS has been in operation. And some of those challenges, of which there are many, include challenges around language and terminology. That's not just with each other, that's engaging in different parts of the organization. A lot of concerns around not enough quality information in order to understand and evaluate the different types of cyber risk that you face as an organization. We know that increasingly compliance has driven a lot of activities and investment over the years, and we're now starting to see a significant shift towards a more business and risk-based approach. We find with cyber risk management there is a lack of integration with other business risk management. So whether you're managing technology risk, operational risk, credit and market risk, they're still often managed in a different way in an isolation in the business. And so increasingly we're seeing security professionals ask, how do we integrate those? We also see a significant investment in a range of tooling, automation and technologies, but they're not necessarily integrated or deployed in a way that is meaningful. So that is one of the challenges that organizations still face to this day. When tools are being deployed, it might be a SIM, it might be threat intelligence, it might be a range of DLP, DRM solutions. We often find that because they're not integrated adequately, it often makes it difficult to interpret, analyze, evaluate information, and from that help the organization make more informed decisions around cyber risk and other types of risk. We also see a lot of organizations measuring the wrong data points. They measure what's easy, not what they need to measure in order to gain a better understanding of the extent to which information technology is being protected. And ultimately, and potentially one of the biggest challenges of all, is a limited approach to providing assurance to the different stakeholders all the way up to the board. What we mean by that is a lot of investment in resources and technology and people are taken, yet there's very little effort in actually proving that the people that you've hired, the processes and methodologies that you're using, the way that you're using the tools is actually proven to be helping to improve risk management and reduce risk, and not necessarily causing harm to the organization. So this is central to one of the themes in this presentation, is around actually being able to demonstrate to different stakeholders in the organization that what you're doing is actually working. And this really comes back to the title of the presentation, which is how do you develop an effective and successful cyber security program? I think it's really important when you're looking at developing or implementing some form of program to help protect against cyber threats, that you're doing this in the context of a broader risk management piece. And it's important to understand the role of a security program within risk management. Historically, when we've looked over the last 10, 20 years at how organizations manage cyber risk and approach information risk, is there's often a perception that you can provide a great deal of security, that you can answer the business question of are we secure with a yes or no, that we can use very specific point values, or we see a lot of this topic through a binary view or a binary lens. So is this information or technology or the organization and operation secure or not? And it's actually very difficult to be able to provide that. What we're now seeing is organizations that are looking to apply a more business and risk-based approach is to appreciate there's a great deal of uncertainty with regards to cyber risk. We need to be able to quantify cyber risk in terms of probability and magnitude. And what we mean by that is, what is the financial implications to the business should a cyber event occur? We also see that a lot of the activities that all of you will be involved in now have a direct link to or correlation with decision making that is taken not just within the security function, but all the way up to executive committees and the board itself. So we're seeing organizations move more to an approach now where they can prioritize actions, prioritize investment, and also help manage expectations with stakeholders such as the board, the risk committee, the audit committee, and so on. So there is definitely a shift moving away from just providing security to actually being able to demonstrate that the approach you're taking is business driven and can be conveyed and visualized and communicated in the form of risk. Very simply put, and it's important because there is a lot of complexity with regards to cyber risk and cyber security today. If you're engaging with a business leader or a senior executive, and they want to understand why you're making an investment, why you're putting a business proposal forward for cybersecurity, there are effectively two main objectives when you're looking to establish a security program for cyber and your objectives with regards to managing cyber risk. Number one, your objective is to reduce the frequency of successful cyber threat events. So whatever that number of events was last year and the year before and the year before that, your number one objective here is to reduce that frequency. You'll never be able to reduce it to zero, but if you can demonstrate you can reduce the frequency by 10, 20, 30%, you're already on the path to providing meaningful data with regards to cyber risk. Now, because you can't reduce the number to zero, your second objective is to reduce the financial loss associated with a cyber event when it occurs to an absolute minimum. The beauty of simplifying it to this level is objective one is about the preventative and detective controls that you implement as part of your cybersecurity program. And number two is about the controls and security measures that you implement in order to reduce the financial loss. So this is where resilience comes into play. This is where you can reduce the impact of an incident when it occurs. You're able to contain it quickly, and that you're able to get the business operations back up and running quickly. And in doing so, you can reduce costs, legal implications, and other related activities. So when it comes to actually building a cybersecurity program, there is a lot of complexity associated with it, particularly for large organizations. We're typically talking about a large workforce, a lot of information and technology that's being used in a range of different ways within the organization. As soon as you look at it from a supply chain perspective, certainly managing risk is obviously of paramount importance. And so what I've done is I've pulled together a range of practices, disciplines, and other measures that you should consider when you embark on an activity to build a security program for cyber. So first of all, you need a very strong governance piece. This is to help you set direction, set strategy for your approach to cybersecurity. The governance element typically involves a very strong alignment piece with regards to the business. So your security strategy should be very much aligned with the business strategy. In addition to setting direction with governance, there are a lot of management activities required. This may materialize in the form of having a very strong policy, standards, procedures, and guidelines, establishing ownership and roles and responsibilities for key individuals throughout the organization who have a responsibility for managing cyber risk. When you're looking at a security program, typically there's a significant emphasis on security controls, measures, and other activities. There is a need to incorporate and integrate security architecture and everything that comes with architecture, such as principles, a control framework, patterns, security solutions. All of that is a very important building block on which to build. And typically that is supported by a range of tools. We wouldn't encourage you to go out and buy a range of tools yet. Obviously, there's a need to understand how you prioritize your investment, but tooling is often required to automate a number of activities which you just cannot do effectively today in the current environment. As you build a cybersecurity program, it's important to understand the threat landscape and also the infrastructure and the assets that you're managing on an ongoing basis. There was always an element of uncertainty with regards to where your information assets reside, who has responsibility for them, and it's no surprise that many standards and frameworks out there, including ours, have a particular emphasis on the importance of asset management and having a very good, strong understanding and inventory or a register of where those information assets are. That will always help determine the extent to which they need to be protected. Once you have an understanding of that, you can start to implement an approach to measure, identifying which metrics you require, how you go about analyzing that information, all of which is typically used to help visualize the cyber risk and communicate that to different parties. And obviously, the information that you convey to your internal security teams will be very different to what you communicate to the board level and the risk committee. And it's really the cyber risk management framework that sits above the security program that will help shape how, why, and when you measure, analyze, and communicate the different information that you collect. Ultimately, as you develop a cybersecurity program, you are looking to inform decision-making within the business and provide meaningful information that can lead to effective action. So whether it's a methodology that's being followed, or a process or a set of procedures, that decision support is absolutely key. There's a few other elements there on the right-hand side which are an important part of developing a program. You need to be mindful of the supply chain. We're not just talking about a cloud provider or a vendor or a manufacturer that's providing some equipment or some software. The supply chain here is really taking into account every organization that sits within the supply chain. So it might be your suppliers and business partners that are processing information, sharing technology, contributing to managing a business process, all the way through to the end user, which might be a client, a customer. It could even be a citizen, depending on the type of organization that you're working in. That supply chain piece requires resilience, not just your organization. I've talked a little bit about asset management and the need to understand where those assets are. And one of the things that we find increasingly important with regards to a cybersecurity program and the managing of cyber risk is to actually understand the business. So business process mapping, engaging with business analysts within your organization is a very important activity that is often overlooked. As you start to build a cybersecurity program, obviously from a threat and vulnerability management perspective, it's key to understand what events you're looking for, how you're going to manage those events and report them. You might be developing a SOC, you might be using SIM tools or similar, such as network forensics, in order to gather that information. Understanding what that threat landscape looks like and the technical and other vulnerabilities that influence the risk of those threats materializing into an incident is absolutely key. I think the final 2 points on this slide are probably the most important. The audit and assessments, which can be time-consuming and complex, really provide a significant role in delivering assurance back to the business. So it's absolutely essential that you take all of these activities seriously and use them to provide assurance back to stakeholders that the controls, security measures that you have in place are adequate, they're effective, and they're operating as expected. And then finally, for when those situations, when those threats do materialize, you need very good, strong incident management. So all of these represent some of the most important elements of an effective cybersecurity program. Just before I look at the last few slides to wrap up, please post your questions. Ardian and myself will be addressing those in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So please use the chat feature within GoToMeeting. So if you are building a cybersecurity program and you're building it in the context of the broader context of cyber risk management and you get it right, what can you expect to see? Well, first of all, many of the 10 points on here are addressing some of the challenges that we saw experienced by Victor Frankenstein on the challenge slide a little bit earlier. The more consistent use of language and terminology throughout the organization, where you can standardize and make it consistent, will certainly help with a lot of communication activities and will also help key decision makers actually make the right decision and make a decision that's informed. An effective security program will help you gain a much better, strong understanding of what the threat landscape actually looks like, and will also give you a much better, more accurate view of what the corresponding losses, typically financial, will be for the organization. You'll be in a much better position to justify with confidence the adequacy of your approach. You'll be able to demonstrate where you're providing improvements and protecting the organization adequately, as opposed to just consuming more and more money, which is one of our biggest challenges. You'll be able to have more informed conversations with regards to risk appetite with the organization. You'll be able to use more financial figures when you're looking at financial losses and financial exposure. And when it comes to integration, if you get the cybersecurity program right and you get all those elements that I talked about working in harmony, that'll give you a much better opportunity to engage with other broader risk management disciplines and practices throughout the organization. As organizations mature with regards to a security program, they're in a much stronger position in order to perform evaluations of different aspects of the program and identify areas for improvement, which in turn should be monitored and measured on an ongoing basis. So the program should help you make wiser, more informed decisions with regards to investments and budgeting, and also improve decision making, not just within your organization, but also with the business, and often help you put financial figures on business cases and with regards to conversations about financial loss. So there's a range of benefits there. I might have some questions on that, which I can talk about in further after the session. So one of the things that often gets overlooked, and it's certainly discussed at great length within our membership and security professionals that I talk to around the world, is the relationship between business and IT and security. There's no better time than today to actually reach out and start engaging more with the CEO, the CFO, the board of directors, non-executive directors, and also the rest of leadership teams, senior management and executive management within your organization. And it's incredibly important with regards to whatever program you're developing and implementing, that you have common ground when you're engaging with the leadership of the organization. So while language and terminology may differ, ultimately you should have the same objectives about protecting the organization and probably more importantly, helping to the organization to deliver and realize its business strategy. So whether it's organic growth, whether it's M&A activity, whether it's being more competitive in a marketplace, whether it's just demonstrating the reduction in financial exposure that the organization faces is absolutely key. And so you need to have commonality on the approach that you're taking. The organization needs to be very clear on why you're making certain decisions, why you're investing, where you're investing, the people that you're hiring and using to build your security function. So all the way through to the activities that you're undertaking, how you're communicating, when you're communicating, what you're communicating is all absolutely key. And it's imperative that you actually use metrics and measurement in order to support your ongoing engagement with the leadership of your organization. So just to wrap up before we go into questions, I've put together 5 takeaways that I think will be of value to all of you. Obviously, there's a lot to take away from a session such as this, but if I was going to leave you with 5 things to go and do today, the first and number 1 takeaway would be make sure that your incident management capability and your crisis management capability is effective. It could be implemented right now if it had to. And I would encourage all of you to go away and test and update accordingly. You cannot provide 100% security. And if you were to receive a call tomorrow morning at 3 a.m. to say something had happened, you need the confidence and you need to provide your senior leadership with the assurance that should something happen, you have the best approach and you have a strong capability in order to deal with that. It probably goes without saying, the second thing you need to be doing is not only applying, but demonstrating to key stakeholders that you have basic cyber protection in place. That would include access control, firewalls, segmentation, secure builds, strong patch management in place. There are many frameworks and standards out there that promote and highlight what that top 10 or top 20 should be, as we do with our members, and that is definitely something you need to focus on. You need to establish a cyber situational awareness. This is about understanding your key technologies that your organization is dependent on, where your critical and sensitive information resides, who are your key individuals. Understanding how all that fits together can often be improved by architecture, business analysts, and a number of tools that are available today. I described simplifying cyber risk as two elements, which is about reducing the frequency of adverse cyber events and also reducing the financial loss when they occur. If you keep those two objectives in mind, it will help you engage and focus your priorities when dealing with business people, peers, contacts in the supply chain, even regulators. And then finally, provide continuous assurance of cyber risk mitigation. This is about making sure that all the steps that you take, all the investment that you make, all the tools that you use, the people that you hire are being used effectively, and that you can demonstrate to stakeholders, particularly the board, that your approach that you're using is actually demonstrating value, risk reduction, and similar. So I think on that note, Ardian, you had a few points to make before we moved on to questions.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for delivering this very practical and informative webinar. I would like also to inform the audience that the PCB provides training and certification services for cybersecurity courses. A PCB certificate in cybersecurity courses will show your dedication in implementing and managing processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. Before moving on with the Q&A session, I also wanted to inform you that the PCB store is the PCB's new business line that has officially launched on October 2019. We invite you to take a look at this new e-commerce platform and its products by clicking the link which I will be sending to you right now in your chat box. Some of the products that you will find available on the PCB store are ISO standards, which you can purchase at a very convenient price. For example, you can purchase ISO 27032 for only $152 US. Now, we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees regarding today's topic. The first question is, why do cybersecurity programs fail? And is human error one of the main reasons why hackers penetrate our security systems?
I think there were two there, weren't there, Arden? So that programs fail, and then human error relating to attacks or successful attacks. So the first, with regards to why does a security program fail? I think there are many reasons why security programs might fail. And I think on the slide that I showed, looking at the different components, it could be that some of those elements don't exist. I think momentum is a big one. If the CISO or the security function or the organization generally doesn't have enough support or buy-in from the business, I think that can affect the momentum of a security program. We often see security programs start with a lot of energy, a lot of documentation, a lot of promise, but typically over time that momentum can die, whether it's complexity, whether it's firefighting, whether there are some other activities that distract the security professionals away from that program. I think also, taking an approach that is not risk or business based can cause problems. If if the program is very focused specifically on just the controls and doesn't take into account the information assets, the business process it's supporting, the business strategy, the broader business strategy, or other factors such as the supply chain, then it might prove very difficult to justify why the organization continues to invest in people, the program, and tools. So I think in order to answer that one, why it fails, it's also important to understand what are the key factors and what needs to be addressed. So it's not straightforward to just get buy-in. Often that relationship needs to be established with senior executives and business leaders. So you need to work on establishing credibility, establishing a rapport, establishing trust with different leaders within the organization. And only then can you start looking at alignment of the strategy and understanding, or being able to convey what are the objectives that are common. So I think that's probably an area to look at: business and risk focused, gaining support and gaining momentum. There are, of course, other reasons why it might fail, but I would encourage everyone on the call, everyone on the webinar, to be persistent and maintain discipline when you're establishing a program. There is no reason why an organization can't refine it over a multi-year period and improve over time. The second part of that question, I think, Ardian, was around human error and the role or the part that human error plays with regards to successful attacks. And I have a lot of conversations with security professionals about this, because there's often an assumption made that we can run organizations and support business processes without error. Well, by our very nature as human beings, we do make mistakes all the time. We are fallible. We don't remember things properly. We misinterpret things. And so I think the security program and the broader approach to cyber risk management needs to take into account the fact that everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes can have huge ramifications. And so therefore, organizations, security professionals need to apply a balanced and comprehensive approach of defense in depth, which is something people will be familiar with, and measures that can try and reduce the amount of human error. That's the frequency objective number one that I was talking about. So reduce the amount of times that humans make error. And then secondly, implement security measures or protective measures that achieve objective 2 that I talked about, which was to actually reduce the impact when it occurs. So yeah, I would encourage security professionals to try and look at the frequency and the loss associated with human error in this example, and then see if you can monitor that over time and measure it, and then see over a 6, 12, 18-month period whether you can actually reduce and demonstrate a reduction in that. Ardian.
Thank you, Mark. The next question is about cybersecurity programs often ignore industrial IoT elements that are newly connected to the network by simply hiding them behind the firewall. Excuse me. How can we educate chief information security officers not look only at intangible assets, for example, data, but also at tangible assets controlled by IoT devices?
So a really important question, and an area that certainly the ISF has been working on over the last 2 or 3 years. So organizations that have industrial environments, or not even industrial, but they might be deploying Internet of Things type technology. Organizations that are increasingly bringing operational technology or OT technology online face this dilemma of how do we maintain efficiency, how do we maintain a competitive edge, how do we improve the operational environments in these organizations while delivering the same level of protection that we have, that we provide for our traditional technology. I think my first response is don't panic. You need to take a balanced and comprehensive approach to this when you engage with a business. There are a lot of challenges with regards to ICS and OT technology because a lot of it can't be touched. If you touch it, it either invalidates a warranty or it can actually introduce a failure to the technology, which is the last thing you want in an operational, industrial, health and safety environment. Increasingly, the manufacturers, suppliers in that space are taking this more seriously. They're providing solutions, they're providing mechanisms to keep the systems up to date, to be able to remotely connect to them and protect them. But I think we've certainly learned a lot over the last 10, 20 years with regards to security architecture and applying what we would consider to be good basic cyber hygiene. And so I think while you can't apply 100% of the approaches and techniques that we've traditionally applied to date, there are solutions there available, and many of which we've looked at. With regard to trying to get buy-in on that or engaging with a business, I would definitely encourage you to look at some of the challenges that we've seen in such sectors such as oil and gas. The Saudi Aramco challenges that they've had to deal with over the last 5-10 years are very prominent. I would encourage people to learn about Stuxnet, which is the first digital weapon that we know of being used about a decade ago. There's a very good book called Countdown to Zero Day by Kim Zeta from Wired, which will provide incredible insight into what that malware did and how it was developed and why it operated the way it did. But I think if you can engage with a business with a realistic, practical approach to protecting these environments and support that with some statistics and some figures around the potential risk the organization faces, you'll be in a much better position to reduce the risk of those environments. You won't do it 100%, but you will reduce it. Ariane.
Thank you, Mark. Now, because of the time limitation, we'll only answer 1 or 2 questions and then conclude the presentation. The next question is, if we had to prioritize objectives for the internal audit function, what is more important, security incident management, risk management, or planning?
What was the third one?
Planning.
So I still didn't hear that, Ariane. I've got incident management, risk management,
and planning.
Planning.
Yes.
Okay. This is a very common question that we discuss with members. I would say, personally, your #1 priority is incident management because you don't know what might happen in the next 24 hours. So I always encourage security professionals, make sure you know everyone's aware of their responsibilities, that everyone has a very strong, up-to-date communication plan, so that if something does happen tomorrow, later this week or next week, you've got the ability to respond. All security management and risk management requires planning. Planning only comes once you prioritize. I think I would add something between incident management and risk management, and it is in my takeaways, which people will see, and that is get the basics right. Make sure that you're keeping your systems up to date, you're protecting them through firewalls, that your malware is up to date, that you're segmenting networks, and that you've got good access control in place, including for privilege management or privilege access. I would do all of that before you start actually applying a risk-based approach. Pretty much all the activities following will be influenced by risk management, including the cybersecurity program.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Now, to conclude the presentation, one last question. What are your preferred methods or models of demonstrating capability and maturity improvement during the program delivery?
Maturity models that are very much aligned with that produced by Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute are very common. We actually have our own maturity model that is very similar in nature. It has 5 scales. You define what maturity looks like, and then you measure it. You set a target and you move towards it. I would just encourage organizations that whatever your security program looks like, if it's modular, if it's structured in a particular way, is that you identify the key elements of the program that are directly related to risk. So you can demonstrate through managing threats, managing controls, managing the impact or the financial loss. If you can find the links associated with those, that is where I focus the focus of attention on measuring maturity. I don't have time to explore it further now, or other than say, for all of you, this will be a journey. You won't fix it overnight and you won't fix it in 6 months. But if you apply a rigorous, structured approach that's flexible enough to improve it over time, that's the best approach. And Ardian, if there are any other questions, I'm very happy to answer them outside of the call if you've got contact details with you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out that I would like to apologize to attendees whose questions could not be answered live in this session, but you can directly contact our presenters so he can answer your questions via email. That's why we place the email down in the slide. And with that, I think we'll conclude the presentation. Thank you, Mark, once again for this outstanding session. And I would like also to
thank you, Ardian.
Attendee.
Thank you, and thank you to PCB. And with regards to questions, I think it's important that I get the answers out to those of you that have asked. So very happy to follow up with you.
I also wanted to inform the attendees that this session will be recorded and posted on our website as well as on our YouTube channel together with the slides of the presentation. If you have any questions related to PCB or PCB webinars, please visit our website www.pcb.com. Thank you all once again and have a great day.